There's video, there's audio, and I think we are set. I was leading a backpacking course a number of years ago. It was a high-level course focused on personal development, and this particular group was having a hard time, sort of. And that was the tricky part. They weren't flailing. They were very clearly underperforming, but not in a way that was obvious to any of them. They had all come into the course with really high expectations, and they had the knowledge and understanding that it would be challenging. So it was easy for them to write off their underperforming as a result of a demanding trip rather than being a result of their actions or lack of action. It was especially difficult for them to see what was going on because all 8 of them were incredibly strong individuals, and they each possessed the ability to kind of grind out this collectively mediocre performance and feel like they had gotten what they signed up for. They just didn't have the eyes to see that they were capable of far more than they were giving, both individually and collectively. And a big part of the struggle, the part that was imperceptible to them, was the need to rearrange the stress and the tension and the challenge so that the group functioned better as a whole and the individuals each received the growth opportunity they had come looking for. Well, as nuanced as it was, I could see pretty clearly the dynamics at play. And I just credit that to years of experience leading this type of trip. But I was having a hard time getting the group to see it. You know, the best case scenario as a wilderness instructor is that you lead and facilitate the experience in such a way that the students see things for themselves rather than simply telling them, which in all honesty, telling them is sometimes far easier. It's just usually less effective. So as the day wore on, the question in my mind became, is there any way to get this group to see what's going on in time for them to make changes today? Or is it best to let this thing play out, debrief around the fire tonight, and hope that they make adjustments tomorrow? Well, I thought about it for a bit, and I came up with an idea for one last-ditch effort of sharing information with them in a way that might land. It was something I'd never tried before, but I was game to see how it worked out. We took a break, we dropped packs, and I cleared out an area in the dirt. Removed the pine straw, got the sticks and rocks out of the way, and I instructed each of them to go find a small rock. As they were doing so, then I drew 3 concentric circles in the dirt, and I shared this model that I'd used countless times professionally to help others grow. I referenced this model in my conversation with Tara Dower in episode 19, and thought that it'd be worth elaborating on today. So we're going to talk about what I call the growth zone model. More importantly, how you can leverage the principles it communicates to grow in all areas of life. It is in reality a really simple model, but it has the ability to make a profound impact in our lives. And I think that it's worth taking a look at. But first, welcome to the Everyday Grit Podcast, conversations to help you think critically, live abundantly, and endure the everyday. I'm your host, Nathan Hicks, and I'm very glad that you're here. Before we get into the episode, let's grab some feedback and a review. I got a lot of feedback from last episode. I'm really grateful to all of you. I was talking with our friend Amber around this idea of borrowing confidence that came up in the conversation with Tara. Amber is an Olympic lifter. I think it's Olympic. That's what I'm going to go with. And she competes in that sport. And she was saying, in that sport, you have to 100% believe in yourself when you go to make a lift. When you walk up to the bar, it doesn't matter what your coach thinks. It doesn't matter what your teammates think. It really just matters what you think. And if you think that you have the ability to lift what you're about to lift. And that raises a good point, that no matter what others think about us, no matter what others know about our ability to do something, at some point in time, we kind of have to call on our own belief and our own confidence to step up and take whatever action is required. I did wonder later, after we were done talking, if that idea of borrowing confidence better transfers in her sport to some time earlier in the strength cycle leading up to an event rather than in the event itself. But I didn't have the thought until after we were done talking, so I haven't asked her about it. Amber, we can pick up there next time I run into you. I got kind of collective feedback from a number of you that said some very similar things. So Christian, Paul, Brooke, I'll name you as representative of this group. And in general, the feedback was that you guys appreciated the approach that I took to the interview with Tara. They thought that the questions were good. And across the board, everyone agreed that Tara was a great sport, especially when it came to questions that she might not have expected or questions that were outside kind of the general realm of questions that she has no doubt heard countless times as she's been on podcast after podcast. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's part of what made the conversation fun, was her allowing me to ask whatever I wanted and being a good sport to answer it as best she could, kind of being put on the spot. She had no idea what we were going to talk about until we talked about it. All right, a review from Apple Podcasts. This is 55 going on 25 wrote, I followed Nathan on Instagram for some time now. I always look forward to his posts. I lost a loved one in September, and for some reason today was a difficult day for me to deal with grief. I found this podcast and listened to it, referring to the podcast Grief and Gratitude, while I was running. Between his voice, his message, and the physical exercise, it helped get me through a difficult moment. Thanks for sharing, Nathan. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to leave a review. And it means a lot to me to know that that podcast impacted you in a positive way and helped you through a difficult spot. So I appreciate you letting me know. That is the last review that's out there, as far as I know. So here is your chance to have a review read in the very near future. All you have to do is jump over to Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and a review, and chances are I'll get to it very soon. Aside from that, please keep the feedback coming, whether it is via email, text message, Instagram message, or phone call. It's all great. I appreciate it. All right, let's get on with the episode, shall we? The likelihood of growth occurring across all areas of life is increased when we are aware, first, of the opportunity for it, and second, of self relative to that opportunity. So if we see the opportunity, we're more likely to seize it. And if we are self-aware, especially relative to willingness, ability, and desire, then we can apply energy toward the specific part of our response that needs it most. A couple of examples. If you recognize the opportunity to grow, you have the willingness and the desire, but not the ability, then you would want to give attention to gathering the resources you need so that you have the ability. Case in point, I took a lesson with my friend Edgar at Osprey Shooting Solutions the other day because I have the desire to learn how to shoot a handgun. I have the willingness to do what's required. I just don't have the ability to do that on my own. It would be inefficient. It would probably be wrong. So it's best if I apply my energy toward gathering the resource, in this case, a retired Green Beret with years of instructional experience to help me fill in the gap. Another example, if you see an opportunity to grow, you have the ability and some amount of desire, but you're not willing to do what's necessary, then applying energy toward developing that willingness is what you need to do. And the example that comes to mind is improving our nutrition. A lot of times people have the desire to clean up the way that they eat. They have the ability, meaning they know some things that they could do differently. They just lack the willingness to do what's necessary. And so if that's the thing in question, you apply energy toward developing the willingness, whatever that looks like for you. Well, as we become familiar with this process of recognizing opportunities, measuring ourselves relative to those opportunities, we also see that the probability of growth is enhanced by a willingness to resist our natural urge or desire, maybe even instinct for comfort. And that leads us right into this growth zone model. So my hope for this episode is that through it, you will be better able to recognize opportunities for growth, self-assess relative to those opportunities, lean into the process of growth with a sense of confidence and hope, know when you might need to retreat a little in order to reset or preserve your ability to learn and grow, and then lastly, to help others do all of the above. I don't know the original source of the model. This model, you can probably find it online. I just don't recall, and I don't even remember, the first time I was introduced to it. There are some variations to the one that I'm going to present, but I like this one better for reasons I'll explain when we get there. So imagine 3 concentric circles. If you've not had to think about concentric circles in a while, then it's a small circle in the center, a second slightly larger circle around the first, and a third one that is larger still around the second. So we're going to label the first one comfort, the second one growth, and the third one panic. And as we go, we'll talk briefly about each of these zones. But spoiler alert, we tend to experience the most growth in life when we're in the growth zone, not so much in the comfort or panic zones, as if that wasn't self-evident. All right, comfort zone. With each of these zones, we're going to define them, describe them, and just point out some things to note. So if we are to define the comfort zone, we might do so by saying it is a familiar psychological state where people are at ease and perceive that they are in control, or they're actually in control of their environment, and they experience low levels of anxiety and stress. And that is more or less pulled straight from Wikipedia. Look, the comfort zone is a great place if we were trying to describe it. I think that whoever penned that definition is spot on. The phrases at ease, in control, and low levels of anxiety and stress do a great job of communicating the essence of the comfort zone. With each of the 3 zones in the model, we'll note that our body responds differently at a mental, physical, and spiritual level. It's mind, body, spirit. Our comfort zone is a place that feels safe, feels secure. It's probably very predictable. It feels natural and easy. And so our mind, body, and spirit are likely very calm when we're in our comfort zone, very settled. Some things to note about the comfort zone. It is likely influenced heavily by prior life experience. And there's a good chance that the further back in life our experience goes with something, the more deeply rooted it is as a place that's comfortable to us. And so if you think about something like being around water, as being in your comfort zone, because maybe you grew up around water and you move away, you're not around water, but anytime you are back in a place where you're around water, it still feels comfortable because it's deeply rooted in prior life experience. Well, because of this, comfort zones vary greatly from person to person. And this is an important thing to remember because it's very easy to make the assumption that when we are comfortable, everyone around us is comfortable too. And this is not only an unhelpful, but it's a potentially dangerous assumption to make when we think about how we interact with people around us. So if you go to the gym every day and that's a comfortable place for you, it's easy to make the assumption that it's equally comfortable to the other people working out to your right and to your left. But for some of them, it's taken every bit of who they are to gather up the strength and fortitude just to darken the door of that place. And so the consideration of that can assist greatly just in treating people with respect and kindness and compassion and being helpful and a whole sort of other things that we'll unpack as we move. But just because you're comfortable doesn't mean everyone else around you is comfortable. As we'll soon discuss, and as I've mentioned, significant growth seldom comes out of this place, this posture of comfort. We can acquire information here, but we seldom grow. And how is that? How is it that we can gather information without so much growing while we're in our comfort zone? Well, if you think about it, it's because it's in the implementation of this acquired information, not the gathering of it, that we typically grow. So what happens is you gather information. To apply it, you have to take action, and it's in the process of taking action that we typically grow, because we bump up against hard things, we recognize obstacles, we feel tension in ourself as we learn to apply this information to the real world. And that's where we get moved out of our comfort zone into the growth zone, which we'll get to in a minute. So think about if you go to a conference and you're just absorbing all sorts of helpful new information, you're not necessarily growing. I'd say you're learning, but I don't know that you're growing in a real hands-on, tangible way. Now, when you leave the conference and you go begin applying what you've learned, and you bump up against the hard things and you push through and you feel the tension and you learn how to navigate it, then you're growing in a way that's more synthesized and probably more helpful and deeply rooted. So because of that, because we don't often grow in the comfort zone, we often hear warnings about the dangers of being comfortable, especially in anything that's connected to the personal or professional development space. We hear things like, we need to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and we need to go do hard things. And I get it, because I share that sentiment often, and I provide professionally the opportunity for others to come do just that. But look, we don't exist in a vacuum, and the comfort zone isn't always a bad place to be. Sometimes it's right where we need to be. You see, the comfort zone gives us a place of rest, of reset if necessary. It's a place to reflect and to ready for action. I couldn't resist the alliteration once it came to me, and it kind of came quickly. Anyway, so rest, reflect, ready for action. It's a place that allows us to create or restore this bandwidth so that we can leave the comfort zone and take on new challenges. The comfort zone is a great place, definitely plays an important role in our lives, but it's not where we grow. That occurs in the growth zone. So if we were to define the growth zone, we might do so by saying it's a place beyond our comfort zone where growth and personal development occur, often requiring one to confront fear and learn new skills. And that's a definition that I just kind of compiled from various resources on the internet. If we were to describe the growth zone, for starters, the phrase beyond our comfort zone kind of tips the hand to the fact that some level of discomfort is implied. The growth zone is definitely outside of our comfort zone. So as such, where we felt at ease and control and experienced low levels of stress and anxiety in our comfort zone, we will now very likely begin to feel nervous, perhaps fearful, less in control, perhaps even slightly stressed or anxious. It's not all negative, though. We probably also feel excitement and hope. We feel possibility and promise. Sometimes you hear people say, I feel so alive. They're often in the growth zone when they express that. The fact that it's not comfortable doesn't mean that it's all bad. We've mentioned the body's physiological response to comfort being calm and settled. In the growth zone, we're probably registering a different response, though it still varies from person to person. You may feel a slight tightness in your chest. Your heart rate or respiratory rate may be just elevated. Perhaps you get a certain feeling in your gut when you're in the growth zone. Maybe it's a sensation kind of muscularly throughout your body. Maybe you get a sense of cognitive fatigue when you're in that place. It varies from person to person, but there's a response if you kind of pay attention, tune in, and recognize it. What's happening is the body, the mind, and the spirit are switched on. When I think of rock climbing, it does this for me. I feel switched on. I'm alert, kind of at all levels, paying attention, and I'm kind of primed and ready for growth in every respect. And in a different sort of way, podcasting does the same thing. It's not easy for me. I feel a sense of excitement. I feel a sense of nervousness at the same time, but it's a good place to be. So things to note about the growth zone. We've described some of what it feels like to be in that experience, but what's actually going on when we're hanging out in the growth zone? Well, we're acquiring a combination of new knowledge, skills, and or perspective via whatever circumstance we're navigating. We are very likely to be bumping up against the boundaries and limits of our own ability. We may experience failure or see that progress is painfully slow. And sometimes it just feels awkward or cumbersome because it's so new and familiar. So I referenced taking lessons with Edgar the other day, and all of these things apply to me. I was bumping up against the boundaries of my own limits very quickly. Progress seemed very slow. I would say that I failed quite often at what I was attempting to do. And every movement felt awkward and cumbersome because it was so new and familiar. I have no neural pathway for that skill. And so everything feels odd. Sometimes we enter willingly into the growth zone, and sometimes we are thrust into it involuntarily. And I need not give you an example. I think all that's required is you take a minute and think of a time in your life where circumstance dictated that you were in the growth zone, whether you wanted to be there or not. Development in the growth zone occurs relative to a number of factors, chief of which is our posture and receptiveness to it. We can be in the growth zone, aka out of our comfort zone, and learn from it, or we can bury our head and wait for whatever circumstance we're enduring to pass. And while we likely gain some resilience from the latter, it's not what it could be. We don't gain the full benefit of the experience. So said another way, though discomfort is often a prerequisite for growth, being uncomfortable does not guarantee it will occur. I'm going to say that one more time. Though discomfort is not a prerequisite for growth, being uncomfortable does not guarantee it will occur. And so sometimes you see what happens is people become fixated not with growth, but with discomfort, and they mistake the two. They're not the two. Discomfort is sometimes required. It's not the same thing as growth. So if you're going to become fixated on one of the two, make it growth, not discomfort. The biggest thing to keep in mind as we spend time in the growth zone is that our comfort zone relative to that area expands and the growth zone shifts. And that's kind of the point. I have a friend that recently started working out, and I happened to be at the gym on the first day that she came, and she commented very quickly after I greeted her that this was uncomfortable for her. It was something she'd been putting off for some time, and she had committed to leaning into it, and here she was. Fast forward a few weeks, I saw her at the gym this week, and she just moved through the whole space with much more confidence. She knew what to do at each station. She greeted people. It was like she belonged there. And that just came from her willingness to lean into the growth zone. And as she did that very rapidly, her comfort zone in that setting increased, which now allows her to re-examine what growth looks like for her and lean into the next level of challenge. All right, so I mentioned there was another growth zone model, and if you Google growth zone model, the one that will likely come up is this one. This variation depicts kind of, if you visualize it from left to right, a comfort zone, then you move to fear zone, then you move to learning zone, finally getting to growth zone. And I have three issues with this model. The first is that it separates fear and learning and growth into three zones. I think it's far more accurate to recognize instead that fear and learning are a part of growth rather than things that exist outside of it. Number two, this left to right depiction suggests, even if subtly so, a linear progression through each one of these zones. Again, misrepresenting reality in my opinion. Experience has taught me that this process is anything but linear. For one, we often move back and forth in these zones. And two, we can hold things, seemingly opposing things in tension, as we very likely feel them simultaneously. We've all experienced fear and excitement and learning all at the same time. They're not three separate things. The last thing, third reason that I don't like this model particularly is the absence of the panic zone. And as much as I wish the panic zone wasn't a thing, it's kind of wishful thinking because, as many of you know, it's a real thing. So let's talk about panic zone for a minute. What happens in the panic zone? It goes to 11. It goes to 11, for those of you that know. To define the panic zone, we might say, again, pulling from various sources, that the panic zone is a state where challenges and demands significantly exceed one's current capabilities or resources, leading to overwhelming stress, fear, and a potential inability to function effectively. So key words, significantly exceed and overwhelming. To describe this zone, we need look no further than that last episode to hear a great description of what it's like to be in the panic zone. Tara did a great job describing her panic attack on the Appalachian Trail during her first through hike attempt in 2017. The panic zone is about survival, whether real or perceived. That's the primary concern. It's how do I get through this moment, get back to a place of safety, security, and control. So in that place, our nervous system is most likely on high alert. Our stress response of fight, flight, or freeze has likely kicked in. And our senses may be heightened and elevated, or they may be muted depending on how we're wired. Now, some of us tend to shut down, kind of go in this power saver mode, while others of us become hypervigilant and really switched on. Things to note about the panic zone. The biggest thing to remember about the panic zone is that in this state, we've at least, at a minimum, reached the point of diminishing returns as far as our ability to learn and grow goes. If not, and more likely so, we've lost the possibility altogether. Now, again, that's not to say that some resilience can't be gained from being in this zone and then retreating from it, but specific higher level development and learning that can be applied to the future just isn't happening here. And so you think about someone that rappels. I've sent at least hundreds of people over the edge of a cliff in my career. And you kind of, they fall into three categories. People who are all about it and there's not much struggle to it. People for whom it is very difficult, understandably so, but they're able to make the decision to do it, follow through on the decision, and be able to lean into the parts of that process that are challenging for them so that at the end they complete it, they can recall what they did to overcome the obstacle and apply those things to later challenges in life. Kind of the third category is someone who can follow instructions and they pretty much shut down, do exactly what they're told, and they get to the bottom of the rappel. And kind of on the surface, it looks like they did the thing that they needed to do to grow. But in reality, that was what they needed to do to get back to security. They are unable to recall anything that they did in a way that they can apply it to a future part of life. And so they were in a panic zone. They kind of maintained composure enough to do what they needed to do, but they did it because that was the fastest way back to safety for them, not because there was any growth occurring whatsoever. Now, there's the potential that a poor experience in the panic zone can have long-term effects on one's willingness or ability, either way, to engage in a similar circumstance again. It can be detrimental, and it's important to know that. Harm can be done in this place. Not always, but it is possible. And the danger here is significant, especially when you consider this happening in areas of life that are really important, because the last thing we want is for a past experience in a panic zone to result in an unwillingness or an inability to engage this thing in the present or in the future. And again, you could probably come up with examples of people who faced something at some point in life that was so scary to them that once they got through it, they just vowed never to get close to that thing again. And in a lot of ways, it hinders their growth and development, at least in regard to those things. So what? That's the model. Pretty straightforward. Comfort zone, growth zone, panic zone. The question is, of course, what do we do with it? So let's go back to that day in the mountains. Cleared out a spot in the dirt, drew the concentric circles, and I briefly explained the model that I've just shared with you. Then I asked each person to place their rock in the place on the model that best represented where they were at that moment. And there was a fairly even distribution across the zones. A couple were in the outer part of the comfort zone or just into the growth zone. Most were somewhere in the middle of the growth zone. And there were a couple, either at the outer edge of the growth zone or maybe just in to the panic zone. But it was crucial for what came next that each individual knew where they were at that present moment. And this is the first of two ways that I'm going to suggest that we can use this model. I'll share kind of two main categories of application, if you will, with some subpoints under each. So the first is using it by applying it to self. Use it to help increase self-awareness and to provide some context to help you accurately self-assess. So number one, for starters, you can begin to explore what puts you in these different zones. Comfort zone is probably a pretty easy consideration for most of us. We know what makes us comfortable, but it's still worth exploring because it's helpful to know what to come back to, what to retreat to that will give us that reset that we sometimes need. It's also fascinating to explore how our comfort zone differs from the people around us, particularly people with whom we are close. But what's the comfort zone look like for you? What does the growth zone look like? And I would encourage you, I think in the context of this podcast, it's easy to jump to being in the growth zone with physical things or things that require endurance. But I would encourage you to explore the growth zone outside of those obvious places. I had a friend that I ran into at a funeral a number of months back, and we were talking, and he commented on being uncomfortable in that place. And I said that I suggested as much, and he kind of dismissed and said, I don't like this kind of place because I don't like people and I got to go home. And I joked back with him. I said, I don't actually think that it's that you dislike people. I think it's that you love people very much and you don't know quite what to do with it. And that's where your discomfort comes. He just smiled and said, yeah, you're probably right. And we kind of went on talking. But for him to explore what specifically about that environment put him in a growth zone would allow him, if he chose to lean into that part of life and grow and expand his comfort zone. I accompanied my daughter to a scholars weekend, like where you interview for scholarships at a private university that she's hoping to attend in the fall. And after being there for a couple of hours, I just noticed something was going on, and there was nothing overt. It was very subtle, but I could tell that I wasn't entirely comfortable. And so I had a minute while she was doing something, and I just started kind of exploring what was going on. And I realized this was not a familiar situation to me. It was outside of my experience. This school is far different than the one I attended. It requires more academic rigor than I had in my undergraduate studies. Costs a lot more than the school I went to. And so my head just kind of began going down this rabbit trail of like, why are you here? You don't belong. What if you can't? What if she doesn't get enough of the scholarship? Oh, why can't you just write a check? What if you had made different life choices? I mean, I can pretty quickly go down a rabbit hole. And I realized that was happening. And by realizing, A, that I was in a growth zone, B, why I was in it, I could spend some time correcting the narrative that was running through my head. And so the growth that needed to occur wasn't anything physical. It wasn't really emotional. It was my cognitive understanding of what was going on, which would have eventually affected my emotion. So what does a growth zone look like for you in lots of areas of life? And then definitely consider what the panic zone is for you. And often it's kind of the growth zone off the rails, right? But still, there are probably some specific things, again, often based on your life experience, that usher you into a panic zone more quickly than you might realize, more quickly than might make sense to people around you. If you know what those things are, it's very helpful in navigating life. The importance of accurate self-assessment, of course, is so that you can take whatever action is necessary, not just so that you know what's going on. So the second thing, kind of under self, is the process of developing as a person works much more efficiently and effectively when you recognize that you're in the growth zone and you choose to lean into it. Recognizing you're in that zone kind of answers all those unspoken questions that begin to come up around what you're thinking and feeling. Sometimes they come up before you perceive that it's happening. But then rather than being fixated on what you're thinking or feeling or how to resolve just the felt nature of what you're experiencing, you can instead choose to focus on doing things that are going to help you grow while you're in that environment. A number of years ago, I was climbing with a friend in the Grand Teton, or on the Grand Teton. We were doing this route called the Full Exum. We were on the lower part of the route, and it's not hard climbing, but the pitch we were on was face climbing. You kind of feel the sense of exposure over your right shoulder as just the valley sweeps away beneath you. And on that particular day, it was really windy. So there were lots of things that were just playing with my mental space. And my friend was leading the pitches. He looked down at me at one point and just asked how I was. And I just grinned because I knew I was in a place that I had often asked other people to be. I wasn't entirely comfortable, but what we were doing was still fun. It was still within my ability. And I just said, I'm kind of in the growth zone, and I'm doing fine, doing great, enjoying it. And I'm uncomfortable and nervous about some parts of this. It's going to be all good. Recognizing where I was enabled me to lean into the challenge and even enjoy the experience as we went through it. The tendency when we're experiencing pain or discomfort, oftentimes is to subconsciously think that it's going to persist indefinitely. As uncomfortable or nervous or in pain as we are in a given moment, we just think that it's going to only be this or worse. But if you can remember in those times that there is a comfort zone and that you can return to it, then you can more easily push through when it's required. The reckoning, this course that I reference and talk about a lot, is designed in such a way, intentionally, so that there's no overnight stay in the wilderness. And it's not because I don't like spending the night in the wilderness. I rather enjoy it. It's by design, and it's so that people that come on the course can push harder, whether it's physically, mentally, or spiritually and emotionally, into the challenge at hand, knowing at the end of the day, if you so desire, you have a shower and a bed. You don't have to camp. You don't have to prepare food on a stove. You don't have to sleep in a tent on the ground. You've got a comfort zone to return to. So while we're in the middle of this hard thing, we're going to push into it really hard because we have that ability. In a number of hours, we're back in our comfort zone. And there are some amusing stories of how people's bodies have responded to returning to that comfort zone. I'll save those for, I don't know that some of those can be shared, but I'll save them for another time. While we're on the reckoning, the next one is May 2nd and 3rd. I'd love to have you. If you're interested in that, or this is the first time hearing about it and want to know more, send me an email to everydaygritpodcast@gmail.com or message me on Instagram and I'll share more about it or sign you up. All right, third thing under this idea of applying this model to self. Going back to comfort zones, self-awareness allows you to use the comfort zone wisely. There are absolutely times that you should spend time in a comfort zone for the sake of rest or reset, like we mentioned earlier. The knowledge that it's there and the wisdom to use it appropriately is very important in just sustaining yourself through life. But you have to also be aware of the comfort zone, don't you, right? It can be a trap. It can be paralyzing in its own way. And often, at least in my experience, the longer you're there, the harder it is to step out of it. So comfort zone, by all means, make use of it. Just be careful with it. Number 4, this is the last thing with regard to applying this model to self. Remember that your comfort zone grows as you spend time in the growth zone. We talked about this a minute ago, but it's worth reiterating. So the things that were once a catalyst for growth, one day become things that are in your comfort zone. If you desire growth and development in any area of your life, it is imperative that you continue to assess and then take action to step beyond what's comfortable. There's just no way around it. All right, so if the first application is self, I bet you can guess that the second is using this model to help you help others. Going back to the mountains, after having each person place a rock in the dirt, I asked them to look where others had placed rocks and consider, first, why might each person be in the place they're in? And then secondly, maybe more importantly, what do you think those people need from here moving forward? So the first thing, sometimes it's hard to understand why people around us behave the way that they do. Maybe on that day it was hard for someone in the group to understand the reason another person was behaving, why they weren't talking, why they weren't pulling their weight, why they seemed removed, whatever, why they were agitated. But then with a little more information and a little context, It all makes sense. Oh, I understand. This person was in their panic zone. That's why they were agitated. That's why they weren't talking. That's why they look exhausted. I have good friends that have adopted children. I've known others who have fostered kids, all coming from really difficult backgrounds. And it's interesting to note, it's interesting because I'm not the one living in it day to day, but I'll stick with that word. It's interesting to see when people come from comfort zones of chaos and they are met with love and order and security, many times their reflex is to revert back to chaos because that's what they know. And so they behave, they act out, they stir things up because order doesn't feel comfortable to them. Being able to consider what zone someone else is in and how it might inform their behavior is very comfortable. So for these parents to recognize this behavior, is coming from a place of discomfort rather than just being a little punk, allows them to respond in a way that's better. I'll just leave it at better. A lighter example, when my wife and I were first dating, she has pretty broad taste and a broad palate. I don't have a very narrow palate. It's gotten better, and I am more apt to explore culinarily since we've been married and since I've known her. But at the time, it was very narrow. But she loved Indian food. There was this Indian restaurant in the town where we went to graduate school, and so I was going to take her there. No part of me wanted to go eat this food, but I cared for her and I wanted to show her that. So we go, and over the course of our time there, the sights and the sounds and the smells and the food, I mean, it was a little overwhelming to me. I thought I was doing a good job of hiding it. She told me later that she thought I was going to break up with her. To which I replied, why on earth would I take you to an Indian restaurant if I'm just going to break up with you? But I was just acting odd. She had no reason why, and no reason to know why. She didn't know. So had she understood or known, he's just so far out of his comfort zone that he's behaving awkwardly, she could have rested in knowing that I wasn't going to break up with her and potentially enjoyed her meal more. My being in the growth zone entirely explained my behavior. So second thing, when we consider how we might use this model to help others, once you know what zone someone is in, you can consider their needs and better support and encourage them. And when you don't know, this little model provides a framework that can give you confidence to engage them and try to find out. So comfort zone, does a person in their comfort zone need to be nudged out of it? Or do they need permission and reassurance to stay and to rest and to reset so that they can be ready when the time comes for them to leave it again? Does someone around you in the growth zone, what kind of support do they need? Can you support them with information, encouragement? Can you provide guardrails around their experience so that they feel safe to lean into it? Can you offer companionship, etc.? What can you do so that they can take full advantage of that space? And then panic zone, how can you first recognize that this is going on with others? And then, what does this person need to be ushered back into a place of security and agency? And spoiler alert, it's probably not being told, hey, just calm down. All right, what does a person in panic zone need to feel safe again? An example that I think works for all three of these zones is the act of learning to ride a bike, right? It provides a good example of one activity that can move a person in and out of all three of these zones. So if you can remember learning to ride a bike, or if you have taught someone recently, you know that there are some parts of that that become comfortable for a person. There are some parts of that that are kind of scary and exciting all at the same time, and they're learning, and it feels doable, but at the edge of what they're capable of. And then sometimes something happens, they have a bad wreck, and they momentarily enter a panic zone from which they need rescue. So this same example allows us to also consider how a right response makes all the difference in the world. So for that person that's in the comfort zone learning to ride a bike, we nudge them into taking more chances, reassure them of the skills they've already acquired, and that they can do more. We kind of nudge them into that growth zone. Someone in the growth zone, we're trying to support through encouragement, offering more information that will help them become proficient. We're maybe providing guardrails, in this case, physical guardrails of running alongside them. We're offering companionship by being there with them so that they can make the most of their time in that spot. And then someone has a bad crash, and quickly we kind of rescue them, usher them back into, if not the comfort zone, a place of being firmly, footed in the growth zone so that they know they're all right. They're in control. They're not too hurt. They can get back on the bike and ride again. My final challenge to that group in the mountains that day was for those who were comfortable or only nominally in their growth zone to be willing to move deeper into that growth zone. And I suggested that if they were willing to do it, it would ease the weight of the other members of the group in such a way that they could retreat from panic zone or find firm footing in a more sustainable way in the growth zone. It would help them. And that's my final challenge to you as well. Number 3, under how we use this model to help other people. A willingness to step out of your comfort zone towards someone around you who's in need can have a profound impact on their life because you have met them where they were. You didn't ask them to come to you. You've met a need. And on your life, because you intentionally stepped into your growth zone, you served someone around you, and then you reaped the rewards of the whole process. Often this is simple. This is reaching out rather than writing off. This is offering encouragement instead of shame. It's curiosity instead of judgment. This is a willingness to sit with someone over coffee and hear their story. It's sending a quick message because someone's world is falling apart. It's doing a favor for someone just because you can. It's a phone call months after the tragedy just to check in. It's simple things, really. It just takes consideration and intention, and sometimes a willingness to step into your growth zone. That's it. That's what I've got. Comfort zone, growth zone, panic zone, and ways I think you can use it. I would love to make this a conversation. I want to hear from you, how this landed, what I missed, how you've seen this play out in your life. Your input will inform the conversation. It'll make me better. It'll make the podcast better moving forward. So if you are so inclined, please drop me a line to everydaygritpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. This cannot be a conversation without you. I'd love to see you on the reckoning. Again, shoot me an email or get in touch with me if you have questions or want to be a part of that. And then as always, I ask that you would spread the word, share this episode or any with people that you think it would be helpful for or a good fit or would get something out of it. And I would really appreciate it if you jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. And that's it. I really appreciate you. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can do so at NJHIX for my personal account or at Everyday Grit Podcast for the show's Instagram account. Thanks for listening. Carry on.